Welcome to the Hockey Writers Prospect Corner, a show with our top prospects writing crew, bringing you the latest news, analysis, scouting reports, mocks, rankings, and much more. From the World Juniors to the NHL Draft floor, from the farm to the NHL, our team covers everything that happens in the world of prospects. So sit back, grab a notebook, and get ready for Prospect Corner.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Prospect Corner presented by the Hockey Writers. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the final 2023 NHL Draft Rankings from our very own Peter Baracchini. I'm your host, Logan Horn, and today I'm joined by my co-host and fellow prospect analysts, Matvei Zator and Peter Baracchini. Wow, I've never said Baracchini so many times in a row. Peter Baracchini, how are you doing today?
Get used to it. No, I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. Once again, we're getting closer to the draft right now. It seems like every single day is just like another step closer to Christmas. So I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely, and you've got actually one of the big dates on the draft calendars coming up, and you're going to be heading there. You're heading to Buffalo next week, correct?
Yes, for the draft combine. It was there last year. Great experience. Looking forward to it again this time around because had a lot of fun interacting with the prospects, watching them do the testing. It was a really great experience.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to hear about it, and I'm sure we'll get a good chance to hear about it next week when you're back from that. Matt, how are you doing? You're not heading to Buffalo, but I don't know. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I wish I was heading to Buffalo. I'm kind of far away. I'm like on the other side of the country. So in another country as well. So it's like it's a bit far.
Quite a ways.
But I'm doing well. I hope to go to a scouting combine at some point in my life, and I'm assuming I probably will. But doing great. And like Peter said, the draft's coming really quick, and we're into June, which means it's like we're into December, like you said, in Christmas, and we're just counting down the days.
Yeah, absolutely. A little over 3 weeks away, which is absolutely wild at this point. All right, we're going to get started here. As I mentioned, we're going over Peter's final rankings of the top prospects in this draft, the top 128, the first 4 rounds. Highly recommend you check it out. You can have it open while you're listening here if you want, or at very least just give it a look over, see his thoughts there. Highly recommend it. So my first question for you guys, it's kind of been this way for a long time now, but there's not a lot of drama in the top 5 at this point. There could be on draft day, there could be some movement maybe, but the top 5 players have been the same since November. I don't know, somewhere around there. But looking at your list here, Peter, I see that Leo Carlsson is at 3rd. I can't remember if he was at 3rd over Michkov in the last rankings you had. He was. Okay.
He's been 3rd since my top 64.
Okay. That's good. It's good to know. But one thing I've been seeing more and more is people not having him ranked over Adam Fantilli, but there are questions about how big that gap is at this point, because it's pretty clear that the gap between Bedard and Fantilli is large enough that we don't need to talk about it a whole lot. But when you look at the next 2 players and how they played at the World Championships, where Leo Carlsson was the first line center for Sweden, which was just really encouraging and really fun to see. And Adam Fantilli played a lot more of a depth role on a team with a lot more NHLers and stuff like that. I'm curious if you guys think there's any chance Carlsson passes Fantilli. I think we talked a little last week about Carlsson scoring in fewer games than Fantilli, had more points. Obviously, he had a much bigger role, though. So, Peter, I'll come to you first. These are your rankings. Do you think there's any chance Carlsson has actually caught up to Fantilli? Obviously, the Anaheim Ducks had the 2nd overall pick. Do you think there's a chance they take him? Maybe give me like out of 100, what percent chance do you think it's Fantilli, and what chance do you think it's Carlsson at this point?
I still think you're looking at 80-85% Fantilli. Maybe Carlsson narrowed that gap because of his play at the World Championships, but I still think that gap is very significant, kind of what it is between Bedard and Fantilli for that 2nd or 1st and 2nd spot between the 2. You guys know me. I'm a huge Leo Carlsson fan. I love everything about his two-way game, the competitiveness, the smarts, the composure that he's had as an 18-year-old, 17 and 18-year-old playing in the SHL. He doesn't look out of place. Like, he's built for the pro game in Sweden. He's definitely ready for that. Come when he's ready for the NHL, because he didn't look out of place at the World Championships as well. Yeah, Fantilli was played in the depth role, and Carlsson got more of those opportunities. But as the tournament progressed, because there was a suspension to Joe Veleno, Fantilli did start to move up into, more of an important role, getting more meaningful minutes, and he scored that wicked goal against Latvia in that semifinals, which was absolutely insane. And that just proves the skill set that Fantilli has and makes him a worthy second overall pick, because both of these players are successful in their own regard, because Carlsson is more of that not depth, but top line two-way center. Fantilli's more of that scoring, player that could take charge kind of thing, where he wants the puck on his stick, doing everything he can to try and win it. Carlsson is very smart. Both are actually, I should just say Carlsson, both are very smart. They're both adept to the situation that unfolds, but I think you see a little bit more dynamicism from Fantilli, where he can be a big time producer point wise, where Carlsson may just be, just slightly above average as possibly a 60, 70 point kind of guy, but again, well-rounded game. So both are very different, but you got to tip your hat to Carlsson for, transitioning very well to the pro level and still maintaining that consistency of what he's able to do, because I believe he had 5 points in 8 games at that tournament. No easy feat, and especially for, a youngster in his draft year. So definitely not much of a big gap between 2 and 3, but if you do make that case, I can understand why, but I still think Carlsson has solidified himself as the 3rd overall prospect in this draft.
Yeah, that's fair. It's going to be a tough one. I think Carlsson made the Ducks' decision harder, but it doesn't seem like it's too hard at this point. Matt, what are your thoughts? Do you think there's a chance Carlsson caught up to Fantilli, is past Fantilli? What do you think about that?
Yeah, same as Peter. I think it's more than likely it's going to be Carlsson 3 and Fantilli 2, because you're looking at Fantilli and he's going to have, it's hard to say what upside both these guys are going to do in the NHL. They're both pretty different players, but, I'd still think Fantilli's kind of solidified his spot after his NCAA season. He's just insane how much production he had compared to some of the other guys around his age range. His age range, for a draft eligible player to do what he did, lead the NCAA in scoring, and all that, and then play really well at the World Championships against men as well. So I'm not saying Leo Carlsson didn't. He had a great tournament too, but comparatively into the leagues they were playing in and how much they dominated, Carlsson again played really well in the SHL as well. But it has made, I think, Anaheim's decision a bit difficult. Looking at it, it's not a clear cut, okay, we're going Fantilli for sure. I'm sure it's entered their mind that, well, maybe Carlsson could be a guy that we pick, but I think ultimately it's going to be Fantilli going to, and then Columbus is going to get a great guy in Carlsson for their long awaited first line center spot that they've been wanting for a long time.
Yeah, actually, that just made me think of something. I want very quick answers from both of you. So it had become kind of after the U18s, where Will Smith and the USA were just dominant the whole time, it became kind of more and more popular for people to think that that Columbus would take Will Smith, and I do think he fits a lot of what they've been drafting lately. It was a bit of a surprise, like some people thinking he'd get taken over Carlsson, but now that we've seen Carlsson at an international tournament where he was really good, who do you think, if Carlsson and Smith are still on the board at 3, who do you think Columbus is taking up? Matt, who do you think?
I still think it's Carlsson, just because of the European connection. Kalkalainen loves his European players, and I believe that he's probably still the guy that they're looking at. Not like Will Smith is going to be a guy that they won't, consider, but I think Carlsson still has that edge.
Yeah, I think after the U18s, there's a bit of recency bias, people being like, Will Smith, almost on Fantilli's level. He's really good, which,
Mhm.
I mean, he's incredible. He's an excellent prospect. He had a great tournament. But I think Carlsson probably just got everyone's attention again. He's like, hold on, don't overlook me quite yet. Peter, what do you think there? Do you agree with us on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all because of the senior competition. Carlson has more experience. If Smith was playing in this world championship and he provides the same level of impact for Team USA, I definitely think you could see a bit more of a debate whether, you have a more high skill, high ceiling type of player in Smith than you do with Carlson. Again, that two-way game. But then again, it's what you value more, the high octane offense or the smarts and the on both sides of the puck. So I think if Smith was at the World Championship, probably a different story as well, or even more of a debate.
Yeah, that's totally fair. All of these are great. These are great prospects at the top. So the margins are pretty thin. But I think we all kind of agree that Fantilli's still at 2. Carlsson is probably at 3. But the teams at 2, 3, 4 have some options between some great players. So the draft combine coming up, getting the chance to interview those players and do some testing, some physical testing stuff, athleticism tests, whatever, strength, stuff like that, could be pretty important in these decisions. A lot of conversations behind closed doors going on in the next week. Okay, so we'll likely get into this next conversation again in a few weeks when we do our full round 1 mock draft top 32. But I'm just curious your guys' thoughts at this point in time. Which range in the first round do you think Matvei Michkov is going to go? Because every time you see a mock draft or you see someone talking about Michkov, it's all over the place. So he could go in the top 5 still if there's a team there that thinks the risk is worth it and using that really, really high pick, really premium asset on someone with some question marks and then also that you have to wait for is worth it. That's totally possible at this point. Maybe he ends up at 8th or 9th overall, Washington, Detroit, kind of in the next section where the picks are a little less valuable. You can kind of take a bit more of a risk. Or do you think he'll fall further than that? Where do you guys think he's going to end up? Because he's going to be the most fascinating player to watch, at least for the first bit, I'm assuming, of the first round. Peter, what are your thoughts on Michkov? Where do you think he actually lands on draft day?
The skill set screams top 5, but I think other factors playing into things, his contract, obviously a team would probably, if that's still in a rebuilding phase, would probably like to take him earlier, considering his high ceiling and his goal scoring abilities. But then again, like we mentioned before, the Russian factor, a lot of political issues as well. It would be interesting to see, but I do have my mind thinks, top 5, but my gut is telling me he's probably going to go 6, 7 in between that 6 to 10 range. And if he falls even further than that, that is going to be a big, not necessarily warning flag or something like that, but it's definitely something where, sorry, Matt, we start that session. I totally lost my train of thought there for a quick second.
All good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely interesting to see what's going to happen because with his skill set, it does scream top 5, but there's so many other factors coming into that. There's, his contract. And then again, a team can try and take him early on because if they're still rebuilding, they have 2-3 years to wait on that. But then there's also the political side of things, which the Russian factor as well. So a lot of factors are playing into this, but I know we're going to talk about a little bit this more in depth next time, but I want to say my mind is saying, he should be top 5, but at the same time, my gut is telling me maybe 6 to 10 in that range because he can't fall for said factors before. And if he falls beyond that, then that's going to create even more debate and a lot more questions than answers kind of thing. And I'm curious to see with, our very own Mark Shag, does his do not draft lists or certain players at certain ranges. I want to know if he's going to have Michkov in the top 5 or safe bet as a top 10. But because of, and even so, there are a lot of people that also looked into the factor that, yeah, he was producing well on a bad team, but then again, his production was still against the team below them, and his ability to rise up against competition may factor in as well. So we'll see. But I do think that he should not fall any further than 6 or in that 10 range, because he is a gifted goal scorer. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, he's going to be very interesting to watch. I almost feel like if he gets past 5th overall, then all bets are off. He could drop 10 spots. He could get taken right away. Someone could trade up to get him. Likely, if someone's trading up, it's going to be someone that's already in the top 10, I would think, just moving up a spot or two just to make sure they get him. But he's going to be very fun to watch. Matt, what are your thoughts? What kind of range do you think Michkov is going to go? Do you think there's a team that he won't get past, or what do you think?
I don't think he's getting past Washington if they go down that far. I mean, I don't think Washington's going to be. They've taken Russians in the past. Even just past draft. I mean, they took a guy that was supposed to go much higher with his skill set, and they got him later in the first round. And I don't think they're going to be afraid to pick Michkov if he's there at their pick. I think I agree with Peter. I think he's probably, like, his skill set is a top 5, 100%. I've said that many times. I think he's going to be a 50-goal scorer in the NHL at some point. But I think he's going to fall out of that top 5 and probably be in that Washington, Detroit range, that area, that 6 to 10. But like I say, if he falls past Washington, I think there's a real big red flag. Why aren't they taking him? It's going to be interesting to see if it gets past Washington. All bets are off. I don't know how far he's going to drop, but he shouldn't drop further than that, I don't think. It's really bad. It's really not that. It's not good that we haven't been able to see him at a World Junior, World Championship, the scouting combine. We're not going to see him there. I mean, all this stuff, all this information that you could be gaining, that would change this decision. It's really bad that he can't take part in any of these things that all the other prospects are doing. Like, we could be talking about how close is he to Bedard, if all these other factors weren't in play. But ultimately, to answer your question, I think he's just going to be in that 6 to 10, even though he probably shouldn't be.
Yeah, it feels like the drop off in talent between him and, well, even the group outside of the top 5 is pretty significant for the most part, which is why he should probably be a top 5 pick. But if you get past that group and into the next kind of tier of players, like, that drop off gets bigger and bigger really quick. And so you'd be taking someone with significantly lower upside or talent level just because you feel safer about it, which is fair to an extent. But sometimes you need to take a swing. And I think I agree with you guys. Washington feels like a natural stopping point where it's going to be tough for them to take anyone over him. Like, I wonder about maybe like a Dvorsky or Danielson or Reinbacher if he was still on the board, like someone that can be in their lineup soon so they can maximize the last couple of years of Ovechkin. But Michkov, if he's on the board, it feels like they're not going to let him go. And if they do, it feels like Detroit wouldn't let him pass. You kind of have to look at teams that have been comfortable the last year or two taking Russian players to see who is going to be willing to this year. And both Washington and Detroit took Russians pretty early last year. So with Dmitry Bachelnikov early in the second round for Detroit and Miroshnichenko for Washington. I also agree. Yeah, he's probably going to land in that range there, but wouldn't be shocked to see him go 4th, 5th, 6th overall if a team learns enough about him that they're confident. But that'll be fun to watch. Peter, I've got a question for you here about your final rankings, and we'll talk about this stuff again. We'll keep doing it until the draft, but I'm curious. I want to know someone on your final list here who rose quite a bit, someone that maybe, I don't know, rose for whatever reason, doesn't have to be any specific reason, that you think deserves a little more attention than they've been getting, someone you're maybe a little higher on than most, but that you think everyone needs to catch up.
Yeah, he wasn't on my rankings last time for my top 96, but Tristan Bertucci from the Flint Firebirds. I obviously he was more known as a defensive minded kind of player, very steady, very, poised in his own end, doesn't get caught out of position, doesn't panic in front of the net. He's very smart defensively. Obviously, the offensive game was starting to pick up, but it picked up even more in the second half. And I believe he finished top 15 in OHL scoring with 50 points. And that's pretty impressive. So the fact that he was able to still maintain that defensive game, but also round out his offensive game and become more involved with the play, I think you got a really strong, potential, underrated two-way defenseman on your hand that I think teams are going to look at very closely, because he rose up for me. I believe he even rose up in the central scouting rankings as well, between this midterm and final ones as well. So I'll go back and double check on that, but he really stood out for me because he's very consistent, very strong with his, mobility and transitional game as well. So I'm looking towards him. He was at 51, rose up to 32 as well. So that's a big rise for him, to get into that, late second, early to mid third range. And I'm very high on him. And I think he's someone that could probably rise up higher up in not necessarily higher up in the draft, but to that range of where I have him as a late second rounder.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good pick there. Someone who's been rising a little later in the year. There's always a few guys who are putting up points early, middle of the season, something like that. They're playing well and they're putting up points, but it's kind of like they haven't changed my mind on them quite yet. But sometimes it just hits a point at the end of the season. You're looking back and you're like, did he really do that? Over the whole season? Give me a minute. Let me look into this again. And then it just, you change your mind. It's okay to change your mind. It's good to change your mind and to change your opinions on players. And I think Bertucci's a great call there. Someone that is going to get a lot of attention by NHL teams, I'm sure, in the next week or so. I'm very, very excited to see where he goes as well.
And also, he looks like his size too, 6'2", 172. Obviously, he may need to add a little bit more muscle, but, he does, hold his own against stronger competition as well. So the fact that he has a size advantage is a good sign. Yeah,
absolutely. We know 6'2" defensemen go pretty high in the draft. That's it's kind of a theme, kind of a reoccurring theme in the draft. Okay, that's a great pick there. Kind of a related question here. So your rankings, Peter, you have only 5 defensemen in the first round. And so obviously for the last year or so, we've been talking about how forward heavy this draft is. There's very few high-end defensemen, and even the ones that we thought were going to be at the high end at the start of the year, a good number of them didn't make your first round because it's all kind of jumbled around a bit lately. So obviously your draft rankings and then like a mock draft are very different because there are going to be more than 5 going on draft day just because teams need defensemen and they'll reach for them. They will. So I'm curious. I want both of you guys to give me a guess, your best guess at how many defensemen you think are going to go in the first round this year, like actually on draft day. How many defensemen will be drafted? There's a lot of them. On talent, seems like, Peter, you think there's 5. I'd be at a pretty similar number based on talent in the top 32 group. But on draft day, there'll be more. So, Matt, I'll come to you first. What's your best guess at how many defensemen are going to go in the first round? If you have them, use names. If not, just spitball for us.
I want to say 7. Right. The 5 that Peter has in his first round, I believe, definitely will go in the first round. I want to add a couple guys that I think may get pushed into that range. And I'm going to say one is Simashev. I think he's probably a guy that will end up being in the first round. I think a team that's going to really like a guy like that, that type of defenseman will, I don't know if reach for him, but I think he's a first round pick. You've got him early in the second. So, I mean, that's a definite possibility he could push into there. Another guy is, who's the other one? I'm thinking like Lindstein could be another guy that could push himself maybe late first, could be like a 30 to 32 spot. But there is quite a few in the second round that are interesting that could potentially push them. So I'm going to say 7 at this point. I guess.
Yeah, totally fair. I think I think something you mentioned there, like I said, it's a forward heavy draft, but I guess it's more accurate to say forward heavy draft at the top.
Yeah.
Because there have been a ton of defensemen kind of establishing themselves as second, third rounders. Lots of guys that'll be close to the first, but not necessarily worth the very high end pick. But there are lots of good defensemen in the class, just not a lot of super high end ones. Peter, what are your thoughts? You have 5 on talent defensemen going in the first round, but on draft day, how many do you think will actually go in the first round?
I still think 5. Obviously, Ryan Bacher, Sandin Pellikka, and Willander are the top 3. I'm pretty sure that's a safe bet for all of them, but I think it's going to come down to who the other 2 are going to be. Obviously, I have Golyayev and Bonk as my final 2 to round out that 5, but it wouldn't surprise me to see, like Matt said, definitely a lot of people are high on Dmitry Simashev. I thought Lindstein had a really good U18 tournament, and Molendyk and Luka Cagnani are 2 very strong. Cagnani is a more mobile defenseman. Tanner Molendyk has that, two-way aspect to his game. So I want to know is like what teams are going to go for. Even Lucas Dragicevic. I mean, he's a high risk, high reward kind of player.
Yeah.
But a lot of question marks surrounding him. So I think it's going to come down to who those final 2, I'm going to say 5, but it's going to come down to who the final 2 are based on a team's need. Are you going to go with talent or offensive skill like Golyayev, Cagnani, Dragicevic, or players that have more of a refined game to them, like Lindstein, Molendyk, Bonk, etc. So that's just my thought process right now.
Yeah, that's totally fair. That's a good number. I'm gonna go with 8. I think teams are gonna reach for a handful. I think the kind of all the ones you guys were saying, like Ryan Bacher, Sandin Pellikka, Willander, Bonk. I think those guys are locks in my eyes to be in the first round. Simashev as well, I think, is going in the first. He'll go a little lower than I think he deserves, just personally, just the Russian factor. But I think he'll go in the first. Golyayev is a bit more of a question mark to me, just because of the size and the defense isn't really there. But he's really, really intelligent, really smooth skater. He should probably be in the first as well. So that would get it to 6. And then I think Molendyk and one of Dragicevic or Etienne Morin, I think actually has a shot at the first. He's been someone that I've been more and more impressed by lately, and I think he's got a shot at the first round. A couple of those guys probably shouldn't be in the first round based on pure talent, which is why having early second round picks and late first round picks is really valuable, because say there's 20 excellent players at the start, and then a few teams in the middle there just reach on a center that they really need depth-wise over talent, or a defenseman. That'll bump the really talented players back further and further and further. So the more picks you have in that range, you can take a player that you had ranked a lot higher just because a bunch of other teams reached on players. So as a fan of a hockey team, as long as your team isn't the one reaching on players, you should be very happy that people reach on defensemen, because it gives your favorite team a chance to draft for talent, take a big home run swing. All right, I've got just a quick fire question for you guys here, and then we'll move on to the back half of the show. Just a quick, easy one. I'll answer first to give you a second to think, but I want to know how many goalies you guys think will be drafted by the end of round 2 this time, because we don't have any of the really high-end goaltending prospects this year. There's a chance 1 or 2 could go at the very end of the first, but it feels like there'll be a big run on goalies, as we usually see, probably in the second, maybe third range. Personally, I think we've got Hrabal, Augustine, Bjarnason, and was his last name Fowler from the Youngstown Phantoms in the USHL. I think he'll go. I think he's risen enough. So I think 4, but there's a couple that could come and go in that area. We could get 1, we could get 2, we could get 7, who knows? Peter, what are your thoughts? How many goalies do you think will go by the end of round 2? Yeah,
and I think that's a good number too. I based on my ranking, I'm gonna regret having Jacob Fowler as low as I am, and that's like early 4th, because obviously he could definitely rise up. I thought, even looking at someone like Thomas Milic too, with the Memorial Cup or the playoff run that he's having right now, he could definitely rise up, even though I have Scott Ratzlaff ahead of him in my top 50 as well, because I liked his composure as well when he took over the net and kept Seattle in there, because he had decent numbers and decent showings as well. So yeah, definitely 4 to 5 goaltenders is a good possibility that can happen, especially in the later round, because you have some good talent, but nothing that's really worth possibly wasting a first on. Although I still think Trey Augustine is my top goaltender, being ranked 32nd, but we'll see.
Yeah, totally fair. Matt, what do you think? How many goalies do you think will be drafted by the end of round 2?
I think it's probably that 4 or 5. I think I'll settle on 5. I think a 5th one is going to end up getting in there. Guys like Augustine for sure, I think is the top goaltender. We've said many times. Hrabal definitely. Bjarnason, I still think, even though his stock is lowered a bit, I think he's still ending up in that first 3 rounds. In the second round, I think you probably will end up being in there. So there's 3. And guys like, Ratzlaff, I think has done enough as well. So there's your 4. And then I think Milic is going to end up being, I really hope. So I'm going to say that he's going to end up being in the second round, but it just seems like he's having some bad luck there. I like him in that 3rd round, Peter, where you have him, but I hope that he kind of pushes himself into that second round, because he definitely has done enough in my mind to warrant a pick there.
Yeah, I wonder, we've talked about Milic before, and I'm sure we will in our draft recap, whether he gets drafted or not. But it feels like he should have been drafted at the latest, like last year.
Yeah.
It felt like it was a pretty much a no-brainer pick there. And I'm wondering now if teams are kind of playing chicken with each other and just like, if I don't draft him and hopefully no one else drafts him, then I can sign him right away after the draft once he's available as a CHL free agent.
Who's going to blink first, kind of thing.
Yeah. Or who's going to take him with a second rounder or a little later maybe. But he'll be an interesting one to follow. It'd be awesome. It'd be a great story to get him drafted finally. But he'll have a contract with an NHL or AHL team next year, no matter what. All right. So that does it for the first half of the show. We'll be right back after a message from the Hockey Writers.
Interested in writing for the Hockey Writers? If you have experience writing about hockey, are passionate about the sport, and are looking to take your writing to the next level, the Hockey Writers could be the place for you. Here at THW, you will have the opportunity to hone your craft at one of the world's largest and most respected hockey publishers. You will have control over what you write, be able to seek out media credentials, and be supported by a large network of writers and editors. Plus, you'll get paid for doing it. If you're interested and want to know more about team openings and requirements, please visit the Write for THW page on the Hockey Writers website. A link to that page is also listed in the description.
All right, so we are diving back into the 2023 draft talk with Peter's final rankings, and I'm curious from each of you and myself, I guess, who's a player that is ranked on your list, Peter, in the 3rd or 4th rounds, the back half of your rankings here, that you guys think fans should keep an eye on heading to the draft. There's a lot of names that a lot of more casual draft fans, prospect followers, whatever, might not have heard of yet, but could be interesting names to hear your team call, somewhat early on day 2 of the draft. So Peter, I'll come to you first here. Who's someone on your list in rounds 3 or 4 that you think people should know about that they maybe don't yet?
Yeah, you wrote a profile on him, Logan. That's Juraj Pekarzik. And obviously, that U18 tournament really had a standout performance. Obviously, Dalibor Dvorsky was stealing the show, but it was the players behind him, the secondary scorers, that were having an impact as well. Him and Adam Fantilli looked really good, and Pekarzik has, like you mentioned, that NHL frame. He's 6'2", 183 pounds, but he's got that refined game, both offensively and defensively, that makes him excel. He doesn't have the high-end skill set, but he's effective at what he does no matter what, on either side of the puck, offensively or defensively. So seeing him at that tournament, although for me it was sort of like a small sample, because it was an international tournament, I thought he fared very well considering the competition that he was going up against. Able to hold his own, and if he's able to continue to do that, I think teams are going to be pleasantly surprised that you could have that middle six kind of forward that could just be a factor and be relied on in any situation. So I'm really looking to him as a name that fans should keep an eye on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. He really burst onto the scene at the U18s with Dvorsky getting all the attention, but Pekarczyk definitely deserves some note there as well. He was excellent there. Matt, what are your thoughts? Who's someone in Peter's rankings, maybe third, fourth round, that people should keep an eye on?
Well, I'll mention someone different because I mentioned Suniev earlier. He's one, but I'll bring up Ty Halliburton from the Vancouver Giants. You have him 105 in the fourth round here, unranked by mostly everyone else in other places. And I think a fourth round is definitely a place where you take this guy. He's got speed, a lot of skill. Yes, he's unrefined in a lot of some other areas, but that's a fourth round pick. I mean, you take a guy that's a little bit iffy on some of his areas, but it's got some upside and big thing in the NHL right now is speed. And if you have speed, you're probably going to be a guy that you're going to like having in your lineup. And I don't think Halliburton is going to end up being a top six guy. I think he's going to be that third, fourth line speed that you could just throw out there on the penalty kill when he develops kind of that defensive game. He's very quick on the forecheck. Lots of skill there. So I'm going to say that Halliburton would be a really good pick in that range, that fourth, possibly fifth round, even though everyone else seems to think he's not going to be drafted at all. So, but I think he'd be worth a flyer around here.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think mid rounds, Ty Halliburton feels like a pretty good option there. One person I'll mention, he's ranked, double check, 70th on your list here, Peter. So kind of early in the third, is Timur Mukhanov, a Russian player who obviously isn't getting a ton of attention because of Russian factor. We didn't see Russia play at international tournaments, but also just the MHL, top junior league in Russia, is pretty hard to see these days. Copyright issues and stuff. But I'm fascinated by this player, and I can't wait to see where he goes. I feel like he'll go second or third round for one of those teams that's comfortable taking Russians. So like Minnesota, maybe Washington, Columbus, maybe Detroit, teams that have multiple picks in the second, third round area. He's a very, very good player. He is also 5'7". And you do not see 5'7" players in the NHL very often. Typically you have to be elite at something if you're that size to make it. And I wouldn't say Mukhanov is. He's got a good shot. He's got a high compete level. He skates pretty well. Honestly, he kind of reminds me of Otto Stenberg, except Otto Stenberg's like 5'11", 6 feet, kind of on the borderline there. And having that same skill set at 5'7" it's going to be a tough road to make the NHL. He's a really good player, Mukhanov, and if he can figure it out and make the NHL, he's going to be a bit of a little unicorn in the NHL. But but I think he's worth it, and I think someone like Carolina, Minnesota, Columbus is going to take a flyer on him pretty early. Going to surprise some people with a name they didn't expect to hear, but I think it's a good bet. It's a big swing, big boom or bust potential, but could be a really fun player in the NHL eventually. And I hope so. I guess on a similar note, talking about Russian players, last year we saw like Ivan Miroshnichenko, who was thought of as maybe a top 5 talent, fall on draft day, partly due to the Russian factor, also partly due to health concerns with he was dealing with Hodgkin's lymphoma in his draft year. But we also saw Danila Yurov, who was considered by a lot of people to be roughly a top 10 pick. He fell into the 20s. So Russian players fall. Obviously, Matvei Michkov, we've had a bit of a conversation about him and how we don't think he'll fall too far, but he'll fall a bit further than his talent deserves, probably. I'm curious if you guys, how many Russian players do you think will make it into the first round this year? We've talked about Simishev and Gulyayev a bit. Daniil But is probably the next highest Russian player. That's kind of the top group. feels kind of unlikely that anyone else jumps into the first. But how many of those top guys, how many Russians do you think actually go in the first round this year? Peter, I'll come to you first. What are your thoughts? How many?
Yeah, definitely two, I think. I obviously Michkov with his high upside and Goliayev with his puck moving abilities and the offensive game. I do think that, his defensive game isn't as raw or unrefined as, some make it out to be, because there have been instances or clips that I've seen him play where he's making good reads without the puck. Obviously, he needs to show a little bit more consistency. I do agree with that, but I think he's developing in that regard, and I think he's starting to show that a little bit. So I think that's what may save him from falling into the second round and still maintaining a first round label for him, because he is very dynamic, especially with his skill set. It's very hard to teach with the speed that he has, that he could just fly through the neutral zone and transition and quickly get to the offensive zone. That's hard to teach, and he definitely has that. So I'm going to say two, with Goliayev being the one other top Russian in the first round.
That's fair. I think, like you said about his defensive game, he's at that size where I think of Quinn Hughes in the way that people still kind of think that Quinn Hughes isn't good defensively for some reason. But that's just because he plays defense differently, because he has to. He's not 6'2". He can't just box everyone out and knock them off the puck and take it away. He just has to outsmart everyone, and he does often. So sometimes when you're a smaller guy, you just have to defend differently. So you have to look for different things when you're scouting them, which I'm sure NHL teams are doing, and NHL scouts out in Russia are doing their best at. And if you think that Goliayev will have that kind of Quinn Hughes best defense is a good offense type approach, which really is working for Hughes. I think he's a top 10 D-man this year in the NHL. If you think Goliayev will defend that way, not necessarily to the same level as Hughes, but if you think he can figure that out, then it's not really an issue anymore. It's just different defense. But Matt, what are your thoughts? How many Russians do you think go in the first round this year? Michkov is kind of a given, but how many do you think there'll be overall in the first round?
I think definitely the two. I think Michkov for sure, Gulyayev for sure. I'm going to say ultimately three, because I really think Simashev's a first rounder. I think he's going to end up being someone's going to draft him in the first round. So I'm going to say ultimately three, because of Simashev's. I think the teams are going to be really drawn to his skill set, especially because he is a little different than a lot of the defensemen in this range. I think a team in the 20 to 30 range are probably going to, I don't know, not necessarily reach for him, but I think going to end up picking him there, because I think he's just got the skill set that some teams in that playoff range will be attracted to. So I'm going to say three.
Nice. I'm going to say three as well, but I've got a slightly different group. Michkov is my guarantee. But then I have Simashev and Boot. I think they'll be in the 20s range. And I just mostly think that because they have some of the best athletic profiles of anyone in the draft, just size and then physicality. And I think those are, I think both of these players deserve to be in the first round, but I also think those traits are overvalued a little bit by general managers and by scouting staffs. So I think they'll go in the first round. I think they deserve it. I think Goliayev will be a little bit more of a question mark, just his size and just the undersized offensive defenseman usually seems to be a pretty safe archetype to drop on draft day. But then having a 6'4", really, really smooth skating defenseman in Simashev and a 6'5" guy with a really big shot in Boot, those feel like first round archetypes to me. Goliayev is a bit here or there. I'm going to go with three as well, though. I've got one last question and then some quick fires here. So after the consensus top 5 picks, Bedard, Fantilli, Carlsson, Smith, Michkov, whatever order you like, even though we all kind of think Michkov probably won't actually go in that range, but on talent, he is in that group. How big do you consider the next tier of talent to be? I'm going to come to you first, Peter. We can see your rankings here and the next few guys on your list, but how big is that next group for you? and which players are in that group? Like looking at your rankings, where does that cut off? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, all those, like the top 5 players you mentioned, they have, the it factor to try and be difference makers. But then that group after that, that's 6 to, 12, 13, 14, 15, it's a really big toss up because, a lot of players can move up and down. But for me, it's Benson, Leonard, Dvorsky, Barlow, and more. And all of them, all 5 of those players after the initial top 5, bring a high level of skill set to their game, but they're also very smart and calculated on how they do it. So they have that blend of the IQ, the awareness, the smarts, and the offensive game too, that make them hard to pass up on. Obviously, you're going to have questions like Zach Benson's size and his skating abilities, but his work ethic is by far one of the best in the draft. Ryan Leonard and Dvorsky have really great shots. Same with Barlow. Oliver Moore is a very fantastic skater and very smooth playmaker that, was overshadowed by the top line on the development team, but is very, very capable of driving a line himself. And then obviously Reinbacher, Wood, Danielson, Sandin Pellikka, Jaeger, all these players have something that teams value no matter what, whether it's our offensive game, they're developing defensive one, the work ethic, the skill, they have what it takes to jump into a top 10 range. And it's very hard to say.
That's fair. I think the gap between those top 5, which kind of have their own tiers within it, but that top 5, if you take it as one group, the gap between that and the next group is a lot bigger than that next group and the one below it. There's quite the gap between the top 5 and the next. Not insane, but it's a bigger gap there. I think personally, like after the top 5, I've kind of got 5 prospects at this point in that next group, in no particular order at this point, like Benson, Reinbacher, Dvorsky, Leonard, and I have Danielson there. I like Danielson a lot, as you know, if you've listened to the show at all in the last 2 months. But that's kind of my group there. And there's a lot of great players right after that, like Matt Wood, maybe Valander if you're getting a little nasty, Axel Sandin Pellikka. Like those guys are close by, but I've got the next group at 5 personally. Matt, what are your thoughts? Like how big do you think that next tier is after the top 5?
I mean, it's really tough. Like there's just so many guys that kind of get pushed around after that top 5 because they all have the talent to be in that range. I mean, I would put Matthew Wood in my next tier. But you're looking at, so I'm going to say Benson, Leonard, Dvorsky, Barlow for sure. Moore could be in there. Reinbacher. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's just insane. I can't really solidify a next 5 because I think I've already listed 5 and I haven't said Matthew Wood yet. So I mean, Reinbacher as well. So I think you can kind of just put someone in that next tier and you'll be fine. I mean, I don't think you're going to have someone go say, yeah, for sure. No, that guy can't be in the next 5. Sure. You can make arguments for all these guys being in that next tier because, I mean, like you said many times, after that top 5, it's going to be a toss up to see where all these teams kind of go. And that's why it's fun to do these mock drafts because it's all going to be based on what team is in that position of who they want to pick. So, so I'll solidify my 5 here. I'll go Benson, Leonard, Barlow, Moore, and Wood. There's my next 5.
Nice. I like it.
You might have to put someone else in.
Yeah, it's okay. It does kind of feel like I said, that's my top 5 after the 5, but the gap between them and the next guys are pretty low. Pretty small. It feels like picks 6 to 20, 25 are just going to be chaos. Like there are guys that I could see going in the top 10, but I could also see them going at 20th overall. Yeah. Like what if someone just falls in love with Braden Yeager and they take him 10th overall or something? Or what if he kind of slides a bit because he's a little smaller? Maybe teams don't think he'll be a center in the NHL, something like that. He could go in the late teens, maybe early 20s. Like it's going to be all over the place. Should be a fun kind of middle chunk of day one of the draft to watch for us, which honestly is great because sometimes it's a little stodgy. It's a little like chalk. It just happens, as expected mostly. But this year it's going to be pretty tough to predict, pretty tough to expect what's happening next, which is awesome. So I have a couple quick fire questions here. I've got one for you, Matt, and one for you, Peter. So I want you guys' thoughts in the moment here. Matt, what position do you think the Canucks will fill at 11th overall? Obviously, do you think they'll fill a need like center or right D? Or do you think they'll go for the best player available, which I'm assuming, just in this question, I'm assuming that'll be a winger at that point, which they have a ton of. But what position do you think they fill at 11th?
I'll preface this, but if I think that the Canucks are moving down in this draft, I think they're going to trade down. But if they stay at 11, I think they're going to end up drafting a defenseman. I mean, it's even a guy like, and I'm going to say this could be an interesting one, and I don't know if Canucks fans are going to love it, that they could reach for a guy like Willander. If Axel Sandin-Pellikka is gone, and Reinbacher is gone, I think they go with Willander. If Sandin-Pellikka is still there, they'll draft him. So I'm going to go with, they're going to pick a defenseman regardless. And if it is Willander, I think they end up moving down for sure, because I think Willander is going to end up being in that trading with Blackhawks, a 17th overall there, or 19th overall is the Blackhawks, and the Red Wings for 17. I think they're going to end up trading it because I think that's the best path to get rid of a bad contract. So, but yeah, I think it's going to be a defenseman ultimately.
Yeah, that definitely fits. It makes a lot of sense for their needs. And I will say, like, Willander could be considered a bit of a reach at 11 by some, but also, taking the right side of your defensive group from like Ethan Bear, Tyler Myers to Philip Hronik and Tom Willander in like 6 months is pretty good. Like that's a big improvement.
Yeah.
It might not be the best player you could take at that spot, but it is a massive need for the team, and that would be a big improvement, it seems. Peter, so I've got a question for you here now, a little bit different, but also first day of the draft related. Do you think the Leafs will end up using their first rounder this year, the Boston first rounder, or do you think it'll be traded like on or before draft day by a brand new GM there, Brad Treliving?
Well, if this was Kyle Dubas, then yeah, that would probably be traded down, acquire more picks. That is definitely a possibility. That is the Dubas playbook. Even though Brad Treliving isn't able to attend the draft or be a part of it because of contractual issues with the Calgary Flames, I'm still going to operate under the impression that Kyle Dubas is probably still running this draft, even though he's not there. Yeah, I know. But
his guys are in the draft, his people.
The scouts, Brandon Pridham, I think, might be heading, or he's on that interim basis, so I think maybe he may be heading that. I would assume that. But I would personally keep the first round pick, because obviously if a player is there on day 2 and you think you could get him, trade down, get another pick, totally fine with that. But let's say that player's gone, there's still a plethora of talent there that they could take. Obviously, for me, Oliver Bonk is at the top of my list. Last year, they value skill, smarts, and players that think quickly on their heel. I think Bonk is a player that could do that. I think Gavin Brindley is a player that could do that definitely, and he fills certain mold with smaller, skilled players, but has that work ethic and the smarts and the scoring ability. So do you think that there are options there for them to take? And I sure hope Willander isn't there for the Canucks, because I hope he's there in that, 20 range so the Maple Leafs can take him. But I'm pretty sure that's not even going to happen at this point. That's wishful thinking. But yeah, I would like for them to hang on to that pick. But if there's a player that falls into the second round and they still can get him, then they'll probably trade it in and get another pick as a result.
Okay, that's fair. I'm very, very interested to see what happens there, because there's, like you said, Brad Treliving can't actually be there on draft day because of contract stuff with the Flames, which feels very petty.
It does,
because he's going to be in their offices and stuff and talking with them. It's not like it's not like him being there on draft day is like a disadvantage to the Flames somehow, because he obviously, whatever he knew about their scouting and draft setup, he still knows it. He could still tell it to his coworkers in Toronto, but whatever. That'll be over with soon enough.
And also the Flames have a mid first. The Maple Leafs are probably not going to get a player that they want in that range anyways. But
yeah. Anyway,
it is what it is.
You can be petty.
It is what it is.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Toronto does there, though. Awesome. Thank you guys for playing along with those quick fire ones there. We're gonna wrap up our show, as we love to do each week, by going over our prospects of the week. I'm gonna do mine very quick because it's almost like embarrassing to pick him now, because it's like, of course he's a great prospect, but I'm doing Connor Bedard just because like during the Memorial Cup, they did the CHL awards, the end of year awards, and the all-star stuff and everything. So he's a first team all-star for the CHL. He won best player, best prospect, and most points. Those 3 awards there have never been won by the same player in the history of the CHL. Of course, it's Connor Bedard who's going to get it. He's been phenomenal. We've talked about him all year. He's nuts. He's unreal. He's great. Next, Matt. Connor Bedard's great. Matt, who do you have as your prospect of the week? I don't even want to waste my time with Bedard anymore. It's like, we know he's going first overall. He's so excellent. He's just above everyone.
Yeah.
Who do you got?
I got an undrafted prospect, and that's Kyle Crnkovic from the Seattle Thunderbirds. I mean, I love undersized guys, so here you go. 5'7", shorter than everyone on his team, but he's been a game breaker in this Memorial Cup, and he's been a reason why they're in the Memorial Cup final now. And he has 5 goals, I think, already in the Memorial Cup, and he's been a leader for them. And I think he's going to end up being signed by someone after this. By some team that thinks, yes, he's undersized, but he could still potentially be a guy in the NHL at some point. Or even, take a flyer on him. He's done a pretty good job at putting himself on the map here. So on a stacked team like the Thunderbirds, and he's one of their best players on a team that has first round picks. So Crnkovic, my prospect of the week.
Nice. That's a great one. Yeah, he's been a really good story, really good player in this Memorial Cup. It's been a ton of fun to watch. Peter, you finished us off here. Who do you have as your prospect of the week?
Yeah, I too am going to Seattle for my prospect of the week, but it's not a player that you would expect. It's not Lucas Siona. It's not Dylan Guenther, Luke Prokop, Brad Lambert. It is Jared Davidson, Montreal, 5th round pick in 2022, 130th overall. But that wasn't his first year of eligibility. He was passed over multiple times in the NHL draft. And, he looked like he probably should have been taken last year, 89 points. This year, 82 in the regular season, 23 in the playoffs, and 6 points in the Memorial Cup right now. 3rd overall behind his teammate in Crnkovic, as Matt alluded to earlier. But this is a guy that's just been very determined no matter what situation he's in. He's always putting his best foot forward. He's always displaying the work ethic, the mindset, what it takes to win. And I'm glad he's finding success right now. I'm glad the Montreal Canadiens picked him up, because he's looking like a player that's going to provide some value for them down the line if he's able to progress and get better along the way, because he's showing the Canadiens what he's able to do at this Memorial Cup tournament and even throughout the WHL playoffs. So he's my prospect of the week.
Nice. Both great picks there, guys. As we're recording, tonight is the Memorial Cup final. So when you're seeing this, you'll know who won. You'll know if some of the guys we just talked about are Memorial Cup champions or not, but it'll be a real fun game. Thomas Milic is on that list too, I guess. It'll be a fun one for us. So I'm looking forward to that. But that does it for us this week. That's the end of our episode here. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Prospect Corner. Make sure you subscribe to the Hockey Writers YouTube channel to make sure you don't miss any of our episodes. And make sure you check out our site, thehockeywriters.com, for tons of draft content leading up to the draft and on draft day and following. We've got lots coming down the pipe. So keep yourself checked in there. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Matt. And thank you all for watching this week's episode of Prospect Corner. We'll see you next time.